Welcome to a miraculous episode of the Rossifari podcast. Hello, I'm John Rossi. I'm a touring drummer with a passion for animal conservation. When I'm on the road, I spend as much time as possible visiting zoos, aquariums, and conservation organizations. Now, I want to share those places with you. I'll be talking to keepers, vets, conservationists, anyone who can help me in my mission of connecting my people to animals through their people. Join me on my Rossifari. Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome back to the Rossifari podcast. So, y'all may remember that a little while ago now, I tried to launch a third podcast on this feed. So we've got our Rossifari podcast with our interviews, and we've got our Rossifari Zoo News, which is our, Friday Zoo News episodes. That's kind of pretty self-explanatory when you think about it. But I also briefly did a thing called Conservation Tales. I think I put out 3 episodes. And the idea was that they were short interviews about the conservation work done at zoos without a lot of the fluff and background and all that stuff that I do in the other interview episodes. And I really liked this idea. And I quickly came to realize that it wasn't taking off like the other 2 have done. And I debated why, and I came to the conclusion that maybe it was just because 3 podcasts a week is a lot of podcasts. It's a lot of listening, even though Conservation Tales was shorter. But for whatever reason, those episodes just really didn't take off. And so I kind of decided that I was probably going to bail on the project, but I had recorded a few more episodes of the podcast already, and I was excited to share them. They're really cool stories. And as those of you who have been listening for a while may remember, that's when my MacBook crashed and the backup wasn't able to be completed and all this stuff happened. And I really thought I was losing everything, but in the end, what I lost was 1 interview for the main podcast and 4 of my Conservation Tales interviews, the only 4 that I had done, other than the initial 3 I put out. And at that point in time, I said, you know what, this is just not meant to be. They're not getting downloaded that much anyway. And so I bailed on the project, even though I'd love to bring it back eventually because I think it's really cool. And now I kind of get to do that because I was going through my computer recently, just looking for stuff like you do. And I found out that there was without going into too much detail, basically a partially finished backup. And I looked and it was that backup. And 3 of the 4 Conservation Tale interviews that have not been released were there. And they're great. And I love them. And 2 of them are from the Maryland Zoo, and 1 of them is from Brevard Zoo, and they're just fantastic. As a matter of fact, one of the people you're going to hear from today is Kelly Currier, who was back in my first season. I did an interview with her from Turtle Survival Alliance that at the time was the most downloaded and the most talked about episode of Rossifari ever, because Kelly is just a crazy passionate person who it's just impossible not to love. And so today I am bringing you all 3 of those episodes, or at least all 3 of those interviews. I'm going to throw the Conservation Tales intro at the beginning because A, it was me playing guitar and I don't do that a lot. But B, I kind of want to set the tone for that. And then we're just going to go interview because they're all fantastic. And I'm so genuinely grateful that I was able to retrieve this audio. It's so cool to me. So before we get to that, real quick, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Make sure you're following along on the socials at Rossifari, on TikTok at Rossifari Pod, all the good things. So with all of that said, let's get back to the Conservation Tales podcast. Zoos and aquariums are places people go to find peace and excitement, relaxation and education, and to deepen their connection with nature. But that's only part of their story. Accredited facilities are at the forefront of the conservation movement, working to save species and ecosystems, often in unheralded ways. This podcast tells the story of those efforts. These are their conservation tales. All right, so let's start off by you telling me who you are and where we are and what your position is here.
My name is Kat Mantzouris, and I am the Conservation Programs Manager at the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore.
Awesome. And that seems like a good position to have on Conservation Tales.
Yes.
So what project are we going to be talking about today that y'all do here?
We have a lot of various turtle things happening at the zoo.
I love turtles.
And
so
we just keep on turtling along. So we can definitely talk about turtles.
All right. Well, let's celebrate that experience. And so tell me about one of the projects.
Well, one of the longest running projects we've had here at the zoo is a box turtle monitoring project. And that actually dates back to the 90s. We've been monitoring eastern box turtles all around zoo grounds. These are wild box turtles. This was started by a local university here called Towson University. A professor used to come on grounds, bring his students, and then they would track turtles or do something. There's like records I could go through in order to like really figure out what they're doing, but I'm not exactly sure what the whole thing was. But then we sort of took it over. We started monitoring all the different, the box turtles that are on grounds in different ways. We were looking at their health. We were looking at where they like to hang out. And then in 2018 or so, we added another element to it, which was radio telemetry. And that sort of opened up a lot of more different doors on studying different aspects of box turtles.
Cool. So can you explain what radio telemetry is?
Yeah. So radio telemetry is a pretty old technique of tracking and finding animals, but is still around today. It's been around since like the 50s. So if you're watching like one of those animal science shows growing up and you would see people put like a collar on a lion or on an elephant, and then you'd see somebody with a metal antenna, that is radio telemetry. So the transmitter in the collar is sending out beeps or a signal, and that equipment that the researcher is holding is picking up the signal, and they can go find the animal. So you can do that with turtles relatively easily, especially box turtles, because you can just put a small transmitter on the back of their shell and it doesn't really harm them. It's been used for decades and decades and decades. And you can just track turtles and see where they go, basically.
Cool. All right. So you're tracking the turtles around the zoo. Mm-hmm. And are you trying to see if they like rhinos more or cheetahs more?
Kind of. Yeah. There was, so the idea that we had was we weren't going to just put trackers on a turtle just for the sake of it. There's supposed to be, there's like a reason for it. We like have a permit from the Department of Natural Resources to do this. So there needs to be like a good reason and not just for fun, because it is. So the reason why we were doing it is because over the years, since we do have like a lot of data on what we call incidental encounters on turtles, so like ones you just happen to see while we were going about your job at the zoo, is you would see some of them walking around, literally inside of animal exhibits and wandering inside of animal holding areas and buildings, and sometimes like on the boardwalk and stuff like that. And then you would see some that were out in the forest too. And so it was just sort of like, okay, well, are these ones that are going in the exhibit on the boardwalk and all this stuff, are they like just going through the area and going to the forest, or do they live in this area? We need to kind of be more careful about our animal exhibitry and where we build things. So I don't know the answer to that question just yet. So I do have a turtle, and I'm so glad I found her and was able to put a tracker on her, that on previous records show she was inside of the Sitatunga exhibit and like wandered into the giraffe house. No. And sure enough, I put the tracker on, and those were just incidental encounters. Sure enough, when I put the tracker on the turtle, she went from like the road, like she was just found on a service road at the zoo, and then went inside the Sitatunga, went inside the warthog, went outside the warthog, then went up against the leopard exhibit and was walking around there for a while. And I was like, oh, okay. So that wasn't just a one-off with that one turtle. Like, she does wander to every single exhibit. So there is some evidence showing that these ones that we're finding in these exhibits and in developed areas do seem to prefer those areas for some reason.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and the forest, the ones that we're finding out in the forest do tend to stay out in the forest. But like I said, I haven't really analyzed the results yet. It's just anecdotally, that's what it looks like.
So what you're saying is that with scientific certainty, there are now domesticated suburban and urban box turtles. I'm kidding. But that is really funny. And there are zoo fan turtles, so why not?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. How does this play into a larger conservation tale, though, you know?
So box turtles they were once very common. People would find them all, if you lived in a suburban area or if you lived in a rural area, maybe not so much in an urban area, but I do think they are found some in the middle of Baltimore City sometimes. But almost everybody has childhood, at least I'm from North Carolina and I live here now, and there's box turtles prevalent all up and down the East Coast. People all have stories about finding box turtles in their yard all the time. And their populations are actually declining. I think they're vulnerable species, I think is the classification. And when I talk to people who haven't really thought about this, they're like, yeah, I used to see so many box turtles growing up. I used to collect them and do turtle races and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, I don't really see them all that much anymore. And so we're kind of in this unique position here at the zoo. We're in this forested oasis in the middle of Baltimore City. And there's a couple of other forested oases around the city as well. And there do still seems to be box turtles. We do find juveniles. We find some babies. But what are these populations doing? And it's really hard to tell over time how a turtle population is doing sometimes because they just live so long. It's hard to tell, like, you know, their life cycle is just so incredibly slow. You know, they don't breed like crazy like other animals do. So really, it's just one tiny piece of the puzzle of like, how can we save box turtles? How can we keep them in our backyards and so that our children can all find them growing up as well, basically.
That's really cool. Is there anything else you want to tell me about the Box Turtle Project?
It's really fun. And we actually get a lot of people all around, other staff members of the zoo involved. So it's one of the few projects, and we're trying to expand this a little bit more, where a custodial staff person will come out and do some radio telemetry, where a security officer will come out and learn about, some of them already know about it, but we'll learn about turtles, and your finance people and your PR people, people who just are very, very invested in the zoo, but they don't really get to do a whole lot of wild animal research encounter type stuff. But since it happens here on grounds and it's relatively simple thing to do is to go out tracking, so many other people get to experience it other than me, you know, and a couple of other people who have a hand in it.
Oh, that's so cool. I like that so much. I like that extra because first of all, I really love box turtles. And second of all, I like to talk about bonus animals when you come to a zoo. You know, even a squirrel that's running around. Yeah. That's your bonus animal. It's not on exhibit, but it's there. But the idea of a box turtle bonus animal is possibly the coolest thing
ever. It is
the
best. Yeah,
that's
they're very
really
cute.
exciting.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then that's not the only turtle that you're helping out here, right?
Yeah. So
tell me things.
So I think our project with the box turtles has opened kind of some other doors. So we are currently also working with the Department of Natural Resources. We have a wood turtle project where we are head starting wood turtle hatchlings and then releasing them into the wild. Like I said, this is a partnership with Department of Natural Resources. They came to us about it, and we were just very much happy to oblige. We've already had wood turtles in the collection of the zoo, and we kind of already demonstrated to Department of Natural Resources that we were a responsible zoo who knew how to take care of them. We started to have a little bit more scientific clout with the scientific community around here. So they put some trust in us to help them booster the population of wood turtles around Maryland. And it's been a very, very rewarding experience to work with them.
Nice. So, I know the term, but Head Start, just for listeners, what are we talking about
here? Head Start is when you hatch and partially grow up an animal in human care and do everything you can possible to prepare them for release into the wild. Luckily, with turtles, you don't have to do that much. A lot of instinct comes into play, but just about how much hands-on you're allowed to do is something we're still kind of working out. So then you release them into the wild. So you kind of get them over the hump of that really, really vulnerable stage of egg, the tiny little hatchling. I think people who work with sea turtles are probably very familiar with this concept.
Yes.
Because that's always like the hard thing with sea turtles. And so you release them into the wild once they're a little more grown up.
Okay, very cool. And, you said that you do it from the egg state. So do you have like a parental population here? Do you create the eggs yourself, so to speak? Or, do they come in, or how does that work? So
there was a confiscation of wood turtles because turtles are heavily poached animals, especially wood turtles. And the genetics, they were confiscated in the state of New York, and genetics were done on them that showed the origins of the turtle were in Maryland, which is fascinating. That's probably a science that didn't exist not that long ago, that we can actually trace an animal back to a specific area of the United States, even down to a certain watershed is really fascinating.
It boggles my mind.
It's really crazy how you can do that. When I first heard
about it, I was like, what? No.
What? Exactly. So we received those animals, and that's actually what prompted Department of Natural Resources to be like, okay, well, these animals are confiscated. Let's, try to help the population by turning something bad into good. And so they were all females. So, I think and we had another female, I think, from a different situation that had an egg. That laid an egg. So we tried our hand at hatching out, and turns out, we could do it. As a zoo, that's great because you have so much expertise surrounding you, so you can always troubleshoot and learn how to do best practices.
Okay, so you have those females, and then I assume got some males.
Yes, we got some males.
Proper channels, obviously, because that's usually how that works.
Yeah.
And so okay, so y'all literally make the eggs.
Yeah.
And very cool. Play some Barry White and make it happen.
Exactly. That's what I always say. We've got to play them some Barry White.
Now, a question for you. I got to see this, but I would love for you to describe kind of the holding area that these turtles are growing up in.
Yeah. So we are located right now doing this podcast up at the animal hospital areas, which it's actually very, very separated from the rest of the zoo. And that's because we are sort of like we're doing like biosecurity with these hatchlings. We don't want them to integrate into our collection animals, which the collection animals just stay at the zoo. They live here. But while the head starts are going to be released into the wild, so we don't want to do any kind of cross-contamination. So they're holding areas downstairs in an animal stall that's really made for either birds or hoofstock. So it has an outdoor area, but it's got chain link that's closed it in. And there's a large tub with a land and water area with flowing water and a filter. And the hatchlings are just kind of living their best life in that hoofstock stall in their tub, kind of away from everyone else, so they can they can be released into the wild, and we can be confident that there wasn't cross-contamination.
Yep. And that is one of the things that I love so much with these types of projects in general, is that like zoos are doing this amazing, important work, and they're meeting the needs of the animals. Like the turtles, clearly very happy, living their best life, learning how to be turtles. But yeah, they're in a hoofstock stall, and it's just it looks like something that you would rig up, just kind of spur of the moment, and yet it's working to help save this species.
Yeah,
and that's really incredible to see.
Yeah, you got to work with what you got at a zoo sometimes, and what you got is a hoofstock stall. But that's the thing. Their turtles don't really know the difference or care. All they know is they have their water, their food, their earthworms. They're happy.
Yep, I love it so much. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the wood turtles?
Another really fun, fascinating species.
I love them.
I just love their little orange arms and faces.
They're so good. And then, so when you had started, I don't remember you saying this, so real quick before I end this, we're not going to talk about locations, but they do get introduced into the wild, and they do go out to help further the population.
Yes, yeah.
And are you able to monitor how they're doing and everything?
Yeah, because we have radio telemetry. Woo! So we can actually track some of the sample turtles that already were out in the wild, and then sort of compare what our head starts are doing compared to those turtles, and making sure that they are doing well comparatively to the rest of the population. And you can do that through the magic of radio telemetry, something that was invented many, many years ago, but still used today.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Why don't we start off by you telling me who you are, where you work, and what we're talking about today?
Yes, my name is Kelly Currier. I work at Brevard Zoo. I'm a conservation coordinator here. And today we're going to talk about the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow Project.
Yes, I'm so excited about this. And I'm so excited that it's you talking about this because I remember when you were on Rossifari and I asked for a conservation thing, you talked about this and you got so excited and so bubbly. And now you're like working on it. And
yes, I wasn't
awesome.
even working with sparrows at that moment when we last talked. So now I'm here.
Seeing somebody like follow their passions and get there is just exciting to me. So I really love that. But yeah, so let's talk about this. Tell me about the project.
Yeah, the project started in about 2016 is when we started realizing that we needed to help the sparrows by having projects where we bred them at centers, let them grow up a little bit, give them a head start, and then releasing them. And our first releases as a sparrow working group was in 2019. And since then, the population in the field has at least doubled, and birds that have been released have been pairing with wild birds, having their own babies, like just acting like a wild bird would. So it's been very successful so far, and it's really exciting because not all conservation stories go like this, and none of them progress so quickly to where you can see the improvement in a matter of years. So it's just such an exciting story. Also, the Florida grasshopper sparrow is the most endangered bird in North America. So it makes them really vulnerable, and lots of things make them vulnerable. So it's been fun. Brevard Zoo has only been involved since 2020 or so, 2021. And then last year in 22 was our first breeding season for the sparrows. We moved them into big outdoor aviaries, gave them everything they needed, and we had our first chicks last year. So we're in our second breeding season now.
Well, that's really exciting. I'm curious for people, and I know that Brevard wasn't involved, but I also know that you've been following this project. So for people that hear, that it took 3 years to get the first chicks out there, and I know birds mature quickly. So what was that? I don't want to call it a delay, but why was there that gap in time?
Yeah, the gap in time, that's a huge important part. We really needed to figure out what the sparrows needed when they were under our care, like exactly what nutrients they needed, what kind of foods. Like they didn't just need crickets, they also needed green grasshoppers to get vitamin A. And that was like a huge turning point for us having successful chicks. They needed like big aviaries, they needed to be outside only, left alone. They didn't do well indoors. So finding out what they needed took a little bit of time because once the birds have everything that makes them feel safe, maybe, or what they need, then they'll be like, okay, I can reproduce now. I feel like I have the energy to breed. So a little bit of the time was that, getting the sparrows what they needed. And then a little bit of the time was figuring out how we wanted to release birds and where. And in the sparrow working group, it's a lot of different entities working together, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Florida Fish and Wildlife, the places that breed them. There's a lot of like rules to follow, scientists to consult. Are we going to introduce any pathogens to wild birds? How long should we keep them until we release them? There's like so many unknowns that you have to try and decide what's best for the birds. So once you decide what you think is best, you have to get a lot of approval for it from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, basically, and all entities have to agree. So that's what took a little time. It's hard because you're starting from ground zero where you're like, we kind of know about this animal, we think we do, but are we going to be making the right decisions for it in releasing it, where we release it, when and how? So it's like red tape in a way, but it's also like you have just a lot of unknowns and you're trying something, you're trying anything because it's a point of emergency. So it takes time to make sure that we're sure.
No,
You know?
that makes sense, and that's important.
Yeah.
It's not like there are a ton of these birds that you can screw up.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's that too. It's like there's a lot of pressure here. They could be going downhill in the next 2 years, and it's like such a crucial pressure cooked moment. So everyone does hard thinking about it before we make decisions.
That's good. That makes a lot of sense. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, I find the idea of head starting a bird a little surprising. When I've heard of head starting, it's always things like herps, which grow really
Yeah.
slowly. And birds, again, they mature fairly quickly. So how
Yeah.
long do you actually go from hatch to able to release?
Probably 40 days is our
Wow.
earliest
Okay.
time of release. And like in the field, they leave the nest at 9 days old and they can fly. And that's when they're out there fending for themselves alongside their parents. But we are like, we want to have them with good flight feathers, strong flight patterns, able to hunt all of their own crickets. Like that little moment from fledge to the 40 days is kind of like a head start for them. So it's not really called head starting for birds necessarily, but it's along the same lines where it's much compressed, not years, maybe like less than a month, but you are giving them a head start by making sure like mostly the feathers and body condition are primed to be able to evade predators and get to where they need to go, stuff like that.
That's really cool. Now, is there a breeding population? Are some of the birds kind of held back for that reason, or does everyone get released? How does that work?
We do have a breeding population that started from ones from the wild that we brought in. We have 3 spots where they're breeding. White Oak Conservation, us at Brevard Zoo, and then another organization in Florida called APEC. It's like a smaller private one. And we did start releasing adults from our breeding population last year that had done a lot of a few breeding seasons. And we've brought maybe a few in over the years if they are if they have a problem in the field, like they break something, their wing is hurt or something, they might come in and then we'll be like, oh, this is a genetically nice addition to the breeding population. So we haven't done a lot of additional take from the field. We've mostly just held back a few birds that might be released every year that would be good for the genetic population. But we started releasing adults last year because we were like, maybe they weren't really breeding that much, but they're only a 4-year-old bird, and we were like, they deserve to give it a try out there,
Yeah.
They don't if they're not doing breeding here, like they deserve to give it a try. So we don't really have hard rules for that yet, like how much we want to release or not, but we're trying different things. So we're not actively taking from the wild because we just want as many to be out there as possible, making babies out there. So that's where we're at right now.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense to me. And for grasshopper sparrows, what is their expected lifespan?
It's kind of hard to know. We do have ones in the field that we've been monitoring for over 10 years. So ones that are at least 10 years old and that are out there singing, because you can really only find them in the field when they are males and they're doing the breeding song. So males could be out there and decide they don't want to breed and just not sing, and we can't find them, and they're just existing without us seeing them. But we have ones, I think, this year that are 10 plus years old. And then we haven't even had them under human care for that long, so we don't know if they could live longer with us, really. But I would say 10, maybe. Maybe average is like 4 because they're prey animals. It's hard to stay alive out there, but they could live 10 plus. So it's
Very
impressive
cool.
for such a tiny little kid.
Yeah, that's really surprising. That's
I
really
know.
cool. I'm curious about what the husbandry that y'all do is like, given that you're trying to like, and is it a challenge to not, normal zoo husbandry? We all know these animals can't be released. They like to cuddle with you if they're like ambassador animals or whatever it is, or even like the non-ones, even protected contact, they still like look to humans for food. And you can't have a tiger out there looking to humans for food.
Totally.
So is it a different experience doing that kind of husbandry?
Yeah, it's totally different. Actually, it's been what most of my career has been like with doing rehab and then projects like this. So I'm used to it, but to the normal zookeeper, they're like befuddled by what my job is like, But we really do try to give them as much space and quiet from us as possible. So for me, I really do a lot of work in the beginning of creating their habitat and making it amazing. All the grasses that they want, lots of places to hide outside. The little spot that I enter every day to access and change food and water is like in a little corner, and then I just don't touch the rest of it. I let them have that space so that they know they're safe back there. But really, husbandry for me every day is prepping a lot of the food away from them, the cleaning, doing a lot of like data recording, going in there twice a day to bring live bugs and just like putting them in the bowls or throwing live crickets out into their bowl and then just leaving. So I spend as little time in the actual aviary as possible, because as soon as you enter, you just either see them be scared or they start flying a little bit and you can tell they're a little freaked. So when I need to watch them, say, because like you need to get eyes on your animals at all times, I will be outside of the aviary and like creeping through the screen with my binoculars, getting visuals on everybody. So it's a lot of me like working behind the scenes away from them and also being like a super creeper on them. Like I'm a professional animal creeper. I spot animals so that they don't spot me and I don't bother them, and we don't really talk. We don't really train with each other. I just want them to be living their most normal sparrow life that they can. So I kind of want them to be scared of me. So I never try to like calm them in that way or like condition them to get used to me. I never try for that. I want them to always treat me like a predator because I am. I'm a giant. I'm a giant being. So it's like we're preparing them to survive out in the field. So I don't want them to get used to me. So it's different.
That makes a lot of sense. And I totally get that. And I know that your science mind accepts that and is cool with that. But I also know that you love these animals, that you got so excited. So is it ever hard for you just for your heart to just be like, I am with these sparrows, but I need to make them not like me?
I don't know. I guess the science mind overall is kind of like, this is what's best for them. And that like covers everything. I don't really have moments where I'm like, oh, I wish I could snuggle them or I want them to know me. I don't know. I think what's best for them, it just like trumps everything else. Yeah, I think just because I've been doing it for so long and I care about the population overall so much, like the ecology of everything, that is just my main goal. I do like talk about them a lot to my peers and coworkers or tell stories about them, and they feel like my little friends when I talk about them, like, oh my gosh, you should have seen what Eddie did today. He was ridiculous. He was like climbing over this. He was like following his mate around. He was acting like the little king of the land. And I'll definitely, when I talk to other people about them, I will talk to them like I have such a relationship with them. But the sparrows don't know. It's a secret. I want it to be a secret from them.
You're really on this creeper vibe. It's like Crash Into Me, the Dave Matthews song. You're just looking through the window watching them.
I'm good at it, I don't know. It's natural.
Amazing. Is there anything else that you would like to tell people about this project?
I think this project is really amazing because it has shown us and the science field like the power of collaboration and having a co-op amongst all different entities. Like we meet every week, we have a Zoom meeting every week, and everyone is so different. Like we have people from zoos, we have field biologists, we have US fish people that are into policy. Like everyone is so different and we have all these different ideas, but we are coming together to collaborate for this bigger picture, and it just shows like what kindness and understanding and like patience with each other can accomplish. So I think the project is really exciting because of that. Because, sometimes humans can get in each other's way or we can get our own way, but working together can accomplish great things. So I love that about this project.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Totally. Thanks for calling me.
All right. So why don't you tell me who you are, where we are, and what you do here?
My name is Kat Mantzouris, and I am at the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore, and I am the Conservation Programs Manager.
Which makes you Conservation One on the radio.
Yes, I made that up myself. And
I like it. What? Real quick, what does that title mean?
So I oversee a lot of the just any and all conservation projects at the zoo. So I just kind of, have a hand in kind of each and every one of them in some way, some more than others. So this can be anything from helping out with turtle tracking with radio telemetry and golden frog reintroductions, all the way to making sure all the cans at our brew at the zoo gets recycled.
That's awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Would not think of that all falling under the same category. I like it.
Yep.
That's really cool. Good. All right. So today we're here to talk about Panamanian golden frogs.
Yes.
And so let's talk about, I actually have to tell you that, way back in the day, fairly early on in the podcast, I interviewed Heidi and Edgardo down in Panama.
Yeah.
And the reason I knew about that project and the reason that I reached out to them was because I've been coming to the Maryland Zoo my whole life.
Oh, great.
And your signage works.
Oh, great.
There's a great exhibit of them, and it does a good job explaining what's going on with those frogs right now. And so for listeners, if you weren't with us back in the day, I would go check out that older episode. But for now, let's talk about the work being done for Panamanian golden frogs at the Maryland Zoo.
Yeah. So we have the largest colony of golden frogs outside of Panama. They are in some ways our pride and joy here. We absolutely love them. So we were one of the first zoos that actually went down to Panama once it was realized that this chytrid fungus that's affecting lots of amphibians all around the world was going to wipe out these frogs, and they needed to be basically rescued, like literally swooped down, pulled, and rescued. So ever since then, the Maryland Zoo has started to become kind of an expert on many, many different aspects of these frogs, including care, including medical treatments, the best way to treat different ailments that they might see in captivity or elsewhere, and definitely breeding. Breeding was, a little bit tricky, I think, at first for a lot of institutions. But when you have a bunch of golden frogs and you are expected to breed them, you got to get it right. And there's a lot of trial and error. But it seems like over the years, we've become basically hyper-focused and experts on their breeding and care.
Okay, so pause, because we joked in the last episode that, when we talked about turtles and turtle breeding, that you just place them very white, right? But what does it mean to be an expert in frog breeding? Because my understanding is that in the wild, they just breed. They don't need human help. So how do you have to help them? And what does that mean?
So that basically means, it seems like every single frog which there's hundreds of species, they all have their own way of breeding. It's all the kind of the same thing, like the same outcome, but the method is all different with every single one of them. So with golden frogs, you have to have the right time of year and the right environmental cues. So you just help them out with that. And so we know from previous research what the breeding season is for the frogs. So we put the males and the females together during that time of year, but that doesn't always work. You have to have the correct light timing because they use, what do you call it? Circadian rhythms or something like that.
Yeah.
And you have to have the right amount of like quote unquote rain and flowing water and deep enough water and just all these different factors, like environmental factors that you have to replicate here in Maryland that would be normally happening in Panama. So that's the gist of like trying to get frogs to breed is environmental cues.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Very cool. And what do you do with the frogs once you breed them?
So once they go into a tank called a breeding tank, and so that is separate from, that's a different tank from the ones that they live in. It has a little bit deeper water. That way the females can go down into the water and lay their eggs at the bottom, which is what they would do in the wild. So you put a male and a female together. The female needs to have an adequate amount of eggs, and luckily enough, golden frogs have a transparent belly so you can see the eggs. So you're not throwing a female in a tank and turns out she doesn't have any eggs.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So normally that time of year they're all eggy anyway. But you do need to check that egg. We called it a gravidity score. You put them in the female in the tank, and then the male actually, you put the male first because we want him to go in and establish his little territory. And then we put a female in, and then they'll breed in those breeder tanks. We pull them out when they are done, and they get sort of like intensive care in a way because it's a very stressful event for both the males and the females. And we check on them every single day. We watch them eat and make sure they're basically doing very well in those tanks.
Why is it stressful?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, the females tend to lose a lot of their body weight. Those eggs take up a huge amount of room in their bellies, basically. And the males, when they jump on the back of the female and hold on, they'll stay there for days and days and days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so they won't even really eat much, if at all. So they basically end up, losing a lot of like body weight in both of them, but mostly the females in the process. So they need to like bulk back up, and then they can go back to their home tank with their little buddies.
That makes sense. Do we know if there's a high mortality rate of like breeding adult frogs in the wild, or is that just something we don't know?
I don't think we know.
Okay. Sounds like there might be.
It could be. Yeah. And that's their, for a lot of animals, it's just like, boom, that's my last act.
Yeah. Saved the best for last, I guess. I don't know. But so, okay, cool. So, chytrid that we were talking about, right? We've talked about it on the pod a little bit, but just can you explain what that is and how bad it is?
Yeah. So the chytrid fungus, chytridiomycosis is what it's called, is an introduced fungus that was introduced starting, or at least it was noticed somewhere around the 90s, where the Costa Rican golden toad started to disappear mysteriously in its range. And some scientists figured out that there's this sort of like clear, can't really see fungus that was flowing through the water and getting on the amphibian skin. And then they weren't able to really like respirate and things like that. And they die. I think has been discovered it was like cardiac arrest is actually how they die. Since then, it's been found in more than just Costa Rica. It went all the way down to Panama, and it's actually found all around the world and affecting a lot of different amphibians in a negative way. Some don't really seem to, it doesn't really bother them that much, but many others, it's wiped out a lot of amphibians.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate. Yeah. So here's a question. I hope this is okay to ask. Like I said, if not, I cut these things. But one thing that is a big focus in the AZA and in good zoos in general is not pulling animals out of the wild for populations, like for captive populations,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
How is the decision made that like this species is in enough trouble that we are going to pull some of it out of the wild in order to help save it? How does that get made, and what kind of partnerships need to be done? And all that?
that's a really great question. I wish I was one of the people there during the original outbreak for the golden frogs because I'd probably have a little bit more knowledge, but I imagine there's a lot of different people, including the local governments, including local fish and wildlife agencies, who can see the writing on the wall. Like, this is a really bad situation, and it is better to pull these animals now and try to see what is going on with any pathogens, or because chytrid is basically a pathogen. It's better to pull the animals from the wild for now and hopefully resolve it and learn from it later than to do nothing in a lot of situations. And we've seen that with like black-footed ferrets and things like that, which I know is the example that keeps coming up, but it's a really good example of kind of the same thing.
No, absolutely. Yep. And the Andean condors, where literally, or not, and the Andean condors, good Lord, the California condors, where they took the entire remaining population. Exactly. And so I do think it's a beautiful thing. I just, again, I was kind of curious about how that decision gets made, because that's something that zoos are normally opposed to, which I kind of love. So, okay. So, obviously, like we were saying, great idea to pull them out occasionally with certain animals, Yeah. What has happened to the wild population since then?
So they actually have not been seen since 2009.
Wow. And did y'all, not you personally, but is this because they were all pulled?
It was because some of them were pulled and the rest were wiped out.
We believe you literally saved the frogs that were pulled were saved. Yeah. Okay, that's important. That's very good to know. Okay, so what's being done with the frogs then? I mean, I know you're breeding them, but I guess they're not being reintroduced if they haven't been seen since 2009.
So I think there's definitely some reintroduction plans coming along. I think that's the one thing about zoos is you definitely need more expertise than just zoo people. Like, I think those at the head of Project Golden Frog are looking into experts who are experts in reintroduction tactics for amphibians, because other reintroductions have happened with other amphibians. I can't remember any off the top of my head right this second, but they have happened.
Sure.
And like Puerto Rican crested toad, I just thought of that one. But for now, what we're doing at the zoo is we're just keeping up with their genetics. And the way we do that is the golden frogs are part of what's called a stud book. And that keeps track of all the breeding pairs and who's breeding with who and which offspring exist, so that the most varied and strong genetics can exist for future reintroductions.
Right. I mean, and I know that's what we do with SSPs for captive populations as well. But you showed me the place. It seems like there's a lot of frogs there. That's got to be kind of hard to track.
So Kevin Barrett, our amphibian curator here, keeps track of that stud book, and it's a really good job for him because I think he just has the brain for it. Right. It's a lot to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. So what happens? So frogs are born here, and ... They're not being reintroduced right now. So what is happening with those frogs?
So they're just being tracked in the stud book for now, and then they do get sent out to other zoos for exhibitry and breeding purposes. A lot of frogs do get sent back to us after being exhibit animals in order to do breeding, because their genetics aren't very well represented. So they just sort of get swapped around. They are used as a teaching tool. They're used as advocacy for zoos. And then eventually we will send some down to Panama, and reintroduction plans will unfold. I think COVID put that on the back burner, a lot, because obviously there was a lot more things going on at the time.
Right. No, makes sense. And I mean, how is reintroduction viable when chytrid is still, out there?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So since it is a new pathogen, people, scientists probably we're not really sure what's going to happen now that it's established itself. Is it going to go away? Is it going to evolve so that it doesn't kill its host? Because that would be ideal. Right. It kills its host, and that's not really helpful for the fungus. So will there be a more mild version? There are many different studies going on about microbiome on the frog's skin. Why does a bullfrog carry chytrid and have no problem? Why can't a golden frog? So there's a couple of different avenues people are taking, and hopefully one of them works.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Have your scientists looked into the fact yet? So you said that the first animal that was taken out was a golden toad, and now it's golden frogs. Does it have something to do with the color gold? Is it? No,
I know, right?
What I'm asking you
it's
is
so weird,
Kitchen a gold digger? Sorry, I like to have some fun on here. Anyway.
Yeah, especially with all the doom and gloom sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it helps. So is there anything else that you wanted to tell me about?
So the golden frogs up here at the Maryland Zoo are also housed at the animal hospital. So that's because we can have a very climate controlled area. They have a very specific temperature that they basically have to live at. And we have 2 different areas that we house them for keepers to go and take care of them. One is in the breeding room, and a couple of them are in a holding area there. And then we have this whole other holding area inside our quarantine site, and you have to actually take a shower to get into there. That's how much biosecurity is a factor here. Wow. So that way we know chytrid is on grounds. We know frogs of all types will carry it. So basically you're getting your showers for the day if you are a golden frog keeper.
That's really cool, and also probably good for hygiene since y'all are working indoors together. So yeah. Good. No, that's awesome. Thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed that one as much as I did. It was so amazing to me to find the audio that had gone missing, I thought, forever. And to be able to share it with y'all, and also just to dive back into conservation tales. I loved everything about doing that podcast, the vibe and the music and the kind of quicker storytelling, just all of it. And I think, eventually it will have its place in the world. But until then, it was nice to go back and revisit it. And of course, next week, we're going to be revisiting something a little different, as we'll be doing our holiday special for the year. I'm very busy working on that right now, so I hope y'all are excited about that. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to all of my patrons, especially my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Schenk, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, Jenny Owens, and Kevin Williams. And I'd like to remind y'all that the word credits backwards is Steiderk. Conservation Tales is a Rossifari podcast. Produced, hosted, and theme song written and performed by John Rossi. Fact-checking and editing by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Please make sure you hit subscribe and follow along on social media at Rossifari and at RossiFariPod on TikTok. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo or aquarium.